Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, Selma and Beyond, Responding to Tornadoes in Alabama and Georgia. My name is Sally Ray, and I'm the Director of Domestic Funds at the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have more than 30 years, goodness, experience working in the nonprofit world and a passion for community and social service work. In my current role, I oversee grant making for several domestic disaster funds, including the CDP Atlantic Hurricane Season Fund, the CDP California Wildfires Recovery Fund, the CDP Disaster Recovery Fund, and now the new CDP US Tornado Fund. Well, today's webinar is focused on Alabama and Georgia. You all may know that yesterday, multiple tornadoes are reported to have touched down in Texas. Less than an hour from my home, I received all of the warning alarms. And in Southwest Louisiana, an area where I've been actively funding because of the numerous hurricanes that have affected those communities. The risk continues today for Alabama and the Florida Panhandle. This may be the most April-like January that I've ever seen this season, and I'm looking forward to talking to our speakers about all of this today. But first, some housekeeping notes before we get started. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer those questions at the end of the panel presentation. If you're on Twitter, please use hashtag CDP4Recovery. That's CDP, the number 4, recovery, to share and join the discussion. And don't forget to follow us at Funds4, the number, Disaster. At the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey. Please complete this to help us improve our webinar offerings and to better meet your needs. And finally, we are recording this webinar. It will be available on our website and YouTube channel shortly after the webinar is complete. Live captioning is available right now via Zoom. Click on Closed Captioned Live Transcript to access it. More accurate captions will be available in the recording. This webinar is co-sponsored by Giving Compass, National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, Philanthropy Southeast, and United Philanthropy Forum. We thank them for their support. As we begin the webinar, CDP acknowledges that we are working from the stolen lands of the many original peoples. We recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural disaster of colonialism, as well as disasters. We acknowledge when the U.S. was founded, there were exclusions and erasures of Indigenous knowledge about how to appropriately care for these lands, causing environmental destruction and degradation, which has had a significant impact on disaster risk and on communities. We are committed to dismantling the ongoing legacies, systems, and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy. We commit ourselves to understand where and how wealth accumulation has harmed people and the earth itself, and the complexities of philanthropy is connected to that truth. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us and acknowledge the original peoples and their elders, past and present, as well as future generations. At the end of the webinar, funders will understand the different immediate and long-term needs in urban and rural communities, learn about how pre-existing inequities affect outcomes for recovery, and increase their knowledge of tornadoes and how they can support communities to prepare for, respond to, and recover from these devastating disasters. Now it's my honor to introduce our special guests. I'm looking forward to the information they will share with us. Evelyn Zachary is a movement organizing fellow with Project South who brings decades of experience with community organizing, labor rights, and voting rights in rural and urban sites around Georgia. She's worked with the People's Agenda, Pro-Georgia, and multiple community-based groups to address racial, economic, and political inequities. Felicia Lucky is the president of the Black Belt Community Foundation, which was established to strengthen Alabama's 12 poorest counties, known collectively as the Black Belt. After a career in finance, Felicia returned to Livingston, Alabama, and fell in love with the idea of building a foundation with the people, for the people, when she joined the Black Belt Community Foundation. In the last 18 years, fueled by the passion to provide opportunities to the region, BBCF has partnered with philanthropic organizations who want to invest in local community-led driven transformation. Dr. Harold Brooks is a research meteorologist and senior scientist in the Forecast Research and Development Division at the National Severe Storms Laboratory in SSL in Norman, Oklahoma, which he joined permanently in 1992. During his career, his work has focused on why, when, and where severe thunderstorms occur and what their effects are. Stephanie Guilloud is the co-director at Project South, and has been with the organization for 20 years. She plays a leadership role in the Southern Movement Assembly and sits on the steering committee of the Southern Power Fund and has organized around community and movement response to crisis on multiple front lines, including racial justice, public health, and climate disasters. Welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with all of us. Harold, let's start with you and talk about issues funders should know about tornadoes. Before we dive into the specifics, I want to ground the conversation in the science. Over the past few years, we've seen changes, or at least I feel like I've seen them, in how and where and when tornadoes occur. Tell me about what changes in tornadoes funders should be aware of and why that matters.
Sure. And part of this is the fact that how our memory works on things is that we tend to not remember events from a long time ago, or we didn't report them very well back then. In fact, just one of the deadliest tornadoes in Alabama history was 1904, just about a few days ago, was the anniversary of that event. But what we have seen over the last 40 years has been roughly a 10% increase in the number of tornadoes in the Mid-South. So I always think of that as, northern Mississippi through Alabama. And that appears to be supported by some changes in the environmental conditions we've seen. So that's the biggest thing we've seen. No real changes we've seen in terms of the intensity of events. Where they've always occurred is where they occurred, just getting a little bit more of them, particularly in the cold season, so wintertime in the Mid-South.
Thanks for that. It feels like more than 10% to me, but I understand. Science. How can funders help communities become more tornado aware and prepare for storm systems?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important to know is that the 10% for me as an individual living in my house wouldn't really matter, because we're talking about, does it happen once a decade or once every 9 years or 11 years? And I'm not going to make any different decisions about what I do things. But it actually does matter at the community and larger level. And in particular, where we see these events occurring. This is a region of the country which has a lot higher, particularly rural population density than, say, the Plains does, and has a lot more poverty and mobile home occupancy. And all of those things exist that make tornadoes that occur in the Mid-South a significantly greater danger than tornadoes that occur in the Plains. And there's also a lot of stuff that goes along that, everything that goes along with poverty fits in here. Communities tend not to have the resources to respond as well. Individuals tend not to have as much access to information, and likely don't have as good of a place to shelter as they would if they were in a wealthier area. In fact, you mentioned the tornadoes in Texas yesterday, and you look at those events, and that was in a region that's actually covered by having to have higher building codes because of hurricane occurrence. And you look at that, and yeah, there's significant damages to housing. But almost everywhere you see that that walls are still there. The structure, it may not have been very pleasant to be there, but it was very survivable. And rebuilding will be painful, but there's a resource base that allows that to happen. And that's not as true when we get into the rural South.
Well, you started to kind of edge up to this question, answering this question already, but thinking about tornadoes generally, not just this outbreak we're talking about today, how do tornadoes differentially impact marginalized communities?
Well, it really is that marginalized communities with poverty, there comes a lot of other things. For instance, there was a very simple study that was done, it was almost 20 years ago, that found that the presence of storm sirens in communities actually led to fewer deaths. And it wasn't because the sirens did anything, it was because what the sirens represent. That means you have enough community resources to be able to afford a siren system. We also tend to have cases where people have better access to higher quality things like internet. I can sit here and on my phone, I can look at radar conditions everywhere in the country anytime. My daughter lives in Virginia, and she'll, call me and say, what the heck's happening? And I can do, 5 seconds, I can give her an answer and tell her that. That's not as easy to do when you don't have access to those kinds of communication resources. And at the bottom line, housing. When you don't have, in my house, I'm 15 seconds from an incredible shelter inside my house. If I'm in a mobile home that, maybe a mile actually away from where I live, boy, I'm a long way away. I'm minutes away from getting to an adequate shelter. And trying to decide to do that in the dark, in the rain, boy, that's a bar to reach that, walking into my closet in my house, that's easy.
Thanks, Harold, for that insight. I want to bring in our other three speakers to the conversation, and let's stay with the topic of impact on underserved and under-resourced communities if we can. Felicia, the Black Belt Community Foundation serves 12 counties, some of which were hit hard by the tornado outbreak on January 12th. Tell us about the population that you serve and how they were affected by the twisters.
Wonderful. And I'd like to say good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share. As I heard Harold talk, much of what he described is really the area that the Black Belt Community Foundation serves. And I want to just tell a little history to give some context, and I appreciate much of what he just shared, because that explains a lot of why we are in the situation that we are in now at Selma. And I will eventually get into the systemic role that what systemic oppression and racism has led to us being in this space. But I want to say we were created because there was not a space for philanthropy, and we mean in the Black Belt Community Foundation, there was not a space for philanthropy to invest larger dollars. So the founders of our organization, along with the community, said if there's philanthropy out there to support communities, we want to make sure that our region has an opportunity to be included in philanthropic gifts that come into the state of Alabama and into the southeastern region. So many of the communities that we serve, actually all 12 counties, are some of the poorest communities or counties in the United States. We have two that have at one time been considered the poorest county in the nation. Persistently poverty communities are counties that we're serving. So when you think about the fact that there are persistently poverty counties, that already tells a story that much of what was designed to keep them out of. So much of housing, the way the housing has been designed and made available to folks in the communities that we serve were intentionally done so from systems of redlining and so many others. So we do have a lot of mobile home units that are there, and we do have folks who are miles away from churches, which oftentimes serve as shelters, because many of the communities and municipalities do not have shelters that are located there. So when I think about it, we serve 12 counties. At some point, we serve 16 counties, just depend on the need. And the area that we're serving is approximately 1/5 the total of the area of the state of Alabama. And that's quite a bit when you think about 20% of the total of the state's land area, and about 260,000 folks. Well, for some, that's a very small number, but in our communities, it really says a lot about the people that we're reaching. There were 4 counties that were immediately impacted in the storm. Greene, which happens to be the smallest county in the state of Alabama, which has a population itself of only about 8,000 people, up to Hale County, which had about 15,000. And then we had Sumter County, which has about 12,000. And then Dallas, which is the home of Selma, which has around 37,000. And Selma itself is around 18,000. So relative to many of the other larger, more urban communities, these are really small numbers, but yet it still is home to all of the folks that make up those numbers. So what we've seen across the way is that we've seen over 3,000 structures that have been damaged. We've seen close to 6,000 people who have been displaced during the storms. And again, if you're looking at it just across the board, the numbers seem small, but if you're looking at it relative to the populations that we are covering, it says quite a bit, and it's quite a larger population of whom we're working with. What we've seen across the way, and I'll say this, is we've seen homes that have been completely flattened. There were immediate needs. of course, for tarps and plywoods, but we've just seen many of the communities in Selma and even in some of the rural communities just completely gone. And so an opportunity to build many of those homes if the correct systems had been in place, many of those homes would have been built better to code that could have been. But when you take what you can get, we always say our tagline is taking what you have to make what you need. So having a home is better than having no home. And our goal and positioning is to make sure that for all the folks who've lost homes, and we have to think about it, no matter how humble the home, it was still home to someone. But how do we make sure that they have an opportunity, that if their desire is to rebuild as they have, then we help them to meet that desire. But if their desire is to build better or stronger than what they've had, we want to make sure that our communities are positioned for that as well. So we've seen our communities in small communities having, over 3,000 structures damaged or destroyed is a lot. And so we're in a place now of how we position ourselves to work differently and acknowledging the context and the systems that we're working within, but also acknowledging and calling it out so that as investments are coming to the table. And number one, I want to say that there must be a need for investments, and the folks, we can't afford for people to sit by and say that this is not my problem, because unfortunately it is the problem of us all.
Thanks so much. Evelyn, let me bring you in. As a frontline organizer, what are the needs and gaps you're seeing right now, especially in underserved and under-resourced communities?
Oh my God, can you all hear me? Okay, cool.
We can hear you, yes.
First of all, I gotta rectify what Felicia's saying, with what I've been seeing in the community as well. Not as much as she has shown as 3,000 such, but a lot. But again, let me just introduce myself and get started, because I'll get thrown off onto what's going on, I'll tell you. But I'm Evelyn Zachary. I'm a movement organizer fellow with Project South. I want to thank you all for having us. We're proud to be here to lift up our Georgia communities. As you all know, on January 12th, a total of 12 tornadoes ripped through Georgia, ranging from EF1 to EF3 categories. Several counties received a lot of damage tornadoes from the tornadoes, including our sanctuary land, which is located in Griffin, and it was one of the hardest hit areas in the Georgia region. I myself live only about a few minutes away from Griffin, and also a resident of LaGrange, Georgia, which is also my hometown. I grew up in LaGrange, Georgia. Within 24 hours of the tornadoes hitting down in the Griffin-LaGrange area, Project South was on the ground, assisting folks with food, emergency supplies, health resources, and as much support as we could give at that time. We have continued to connect and assist other community leaders every day who are coming together to recover, including several of mobile home parks in Griffin, local barbecue restaurants, and just local people that are coming together to support in the community altogether. We've connected and continue to give out food, supplies, and support community groups in supporting the homeless folks, and also folks in low poverty areas to help them to receive the help and support they need to. To date, there are still over 60% of folks in LaGrange and Georgia without electricity. This make their financial help and getting the assistance they need very hard, and the resources and everything they need from FEMA extremely difficult. Over 100 families are living without their personal properties in the LaGrange and Griffin area alone. Some folks are living in hotels. Others are with family members. Some are living with children who have who have desperate needs and who need desperate support for them. I'll say that again. There's over 100 families living without their personal properties in the LaGrange and Griffin areas. Several of the families have been displaced. Some are living in hotels, some with other family members. Some have children that needs desperate support and support financially for them. In closing, the majority of folks have been working in the area of digital support to navigate FEMA and rental support. Folks who are not homeowners, business owners, are having a lot of trouble seeing what they can access and what funds are available for them. They're getting a lot of runarounds on where to show up for and to apply for these support or apply for this assistance and apply for the FEMA. But when they get there, they're turned around because if they're rentals, the property owner has to apply for the assistance first. They're asked to come back to provide a list of personal items that they can include on to recover some. But from my understanding and talking with everybody on the ground, half of their personal property is scattered all over Griffin, all over LaGrange. They don't have a sense of count of what they actually had or don't have. They don't have a sense of directions on who to contact or whom to contact for financial support, financial help, mental health, and mental, need every day for like sickness that these kids are going through mentally. I don't know what else to say outside of we've been here, we're going to stay here, we're going to continue to try and support as much as we can. I thank you all again for having us on, and I'll pass it back to you, Sally, and you continue on with this thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Evelyn, so much for coming to us right on the ground there. I know part of your connectivity is because you're in the area that was affected, and that's affected some of the internet access there. So we appreciate you working through it with us today. And Stephanie, last but not least, what do you want funders to know about these communities and the recovery work happening in Georgia that Evelyn referenced?
Yeah, thank you all so much for having us. And it's, as you all know, one battle that we face, especially when disasters hit rural and Southern and Black communities, is staying on the radar. And so we're really thankful for this space, and we're in deep solidarity and relationship with the Black Belt Community Foundation and many organizations in Selma and across Alabama. So we're honored to be here together. And we've been through enough of these extreme climate and weather events from Katrina to now. We know that we need preparedness plans, rapid response in this immediate moment. And we also need support for coordinated movement-led recovery and reconstruction efforts. And I think that's the opportunity for funders to support every phase of recovery and to change our understanding of how to invest, as Felicia was noting as well. So not just that immediate moment of crisis when we can see the damage, but significant investments that can really transform the midterm and long-term recovery towards greater sustainability. And taking off what Harold was saying, how do we build back with climate resilient structures, with more sustainable and better schools and spaces and places for people with sirens, and better internet and access and so forth. So I think there's opportunities there, because we know that folks like Evelyn saying and Felicia, folks are coming together every day, all day, to build back as best they can and survive these moments. But what we want to offer is a bigger vision that's at stake, that if we combine those necessary resources with grassroots organizing efforts, these rural Black-led frontline communities can stay coordinated, prepare for the next crises, because we know they're coming, with better plans, more shared understanding. We can do that education on the ground. We can build those relationships. We can make sure resources are getting where they need to get. We have deep experience with community funds like Black Belt, and also community controlled funds through the Gulf South for the Green New Deal infrastructure, through the Southern Movement Assembly, through Southern Power Fund, and we can speak more to that. But those infrastructure vehicles make sure that we get it to the ground, to all the communities that have been marginalized and really are outside of access of even state, FEMA, or even rapid response agency resources that don't often get there. So we believe that funding and investing in these movement organizations and the collaborations, it needs to be before, during, and after disasters like this, because we're the best ones to be on the ground. We're best equipped to collaborate, to outreach, and to make support happen kind of beyond these news cycles, and really build up that infrastructure for the storms to come and for the systemic issues that Felicia noted that we've got to be uprooting at the same time. So it was a lot of tornadoes that hit us, but we believe we can come together, and especially across these borders. They don't recognize that Alabama-Georgia state line. We don't either. In some ways, we're coming together across these movement spaces and community spaces. And so we're really grateful for this opportunity to share some of our plans and our hopes to partner with you all.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And couched in all of that was a conversation, something we say an awful lot, which is every funder is a disaster funder. So if you're funding in these other systemic issue areas, you're a disaster funder, because if we can build up those other areas before, then we've prevented some devastation after, right? Felicia, let's go back to you for a minute. Selma obviously got a lot of attention right after the storms, but I fear that the more rural areas might be ignored. How have you been working to make sure that both Selma and all the other areas beyond that are looked after?
Well, thank you for that. And Steph, I want to really thank you for much of what you lifted up in your comments earlier, because that is so exactly where we are during this point. And the beauty of the Black Belt Community Foundation being in this space is that we do represent 12 counties. So for those other counties that are more rural, they're still us as well. So a part of how we operate is that, and I always give, well, let me stop and just say, when all of this happened, I had no clue what to do. So I have to give a huge shout out to Flozell Daniels, who's now at Babcock, but was in Louisiana, to Jerry Roll in Kentucky, and to others of my peers that I had to reach out to say, tell me the pitfalls to avoid, and tell me what worked really well that you would do more of. So I'm so grateful to them, and I want to thank them, because that had to be my first step. We were founded on the fact that all of the counties that we work with are important, that they are equally as valued, that none is more valued than the other. That had to be the very part of the DNA of BBCF as we were established, because many of the communities that we served had already been shown that they were different, that they were less than by much of the dollars that came from the federal government and from the state government. So if we were to come and be anyway and disrupt that way of being and thinking, we had to make sure that every county was included. So of course we knew that Selma, which we all know that Selma is the birthplace of the civil rights movement. And I always say, with Selma being in the shape that it is in now, the world owes Selma, not the state of Alabama, not the United States. The world has a debt to Selma to pay, and that is for the role that it has played. But a lot of what we did is the very first thing, we talked with the mayor and we established the Selma Recovery and Rebuild Fund that gave us a vehicle through which folks could actually make donations and give to support the work. And we did similarly in establishing a Communities Helping Communities Fund that could also include Selma, but would definitely have the focus for the remaining counties whose names are not as widely known as Selma. That was one of the very first moves we made in making sure that those counties would also receive funding. And then we began to set up strike teams across our regions in each of those counties so that we could begin to really work with them, not just for Selma, but for Selma with the focus, and then also knowing that there had to be work for others throughout the region. Some of what we had to do immediately was to move money out the door. In Selma, there were more people who were displaced, but in Greene County, which is the smallest county in the state of Alabama, there were people who were displaced. So to be able to move money so that folks could have a place to stay. And the way we were able to move money, it was really working with local folks on the ground, who we were then able to give a grant to, who could then help make sure that folks were around. So I just want to say that initially, the very first thing that we did was to make sure the Selma Rebuild and Recovery Fund was established, to make sure that it covered Selma, but then also the Communities Helping Communities Fund was established. And either of those can be accessed through our blackbeltfound.org website. And I will say this, in the building and the distribution of those funds, that will be done by representatives of each of those counties that have been impacted in our area. So those won't be decisions just made at the higher level, but folks on the ground will make the decisions about how those funds are distributed.
Thanks, Felicia. I have one more question, for Felicia and Stephanie. And then we're going to move on to the question and answer section. Please add your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen if you haven't done so already, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we possibly can. Felicia, as a community foundation, you're going to be supporting Selma and the surrounding area for years to come. We know recovery takes a while. What can funders do to support long-term recovery?
Well, for starters, and I want to say this and not in any way being disrespectful, but I really don't think it's rocket science. I know that, and I say this because as I was having this conversation with Jerry Rowland, I don't think she will mind me sharing, is she said, we were immediately able to raise almost $15 million. And I said, well, how in the hell can y'all raise 15 million? And I'm working to get the first $1 million investment. But that's because funders knew and acknowledged their foundation as a vehicle through which those funds could flow. And I know that while we are still younger compared to many other foundations, for the philanthropic world to be able to acknowledge that a vehicle is in place, it is established with a nearly 20-year history of being able to maintain, bring funds in, distribute them out, and to do it and do it well. We've been good stewards over those funds. So I think most immediately is the fact that to invest in community, to invest and to trust in local community on the ground to do the work. I can't say enough about how I think the world owes Selma. And I say that because I do believe that to be true. And I think if there is an opportunity to help save, to help work hand in hand, to build, rebuild, recreate a Selma that can be even more impactful than it has been before, now is the time. I know when I think immediately of some of the needs, I think of it, many of the conversations we've had as we talked about housing, that is on the forefront. And so a part of what we love to see happen across the space is we'd love to be able to come up with some creative approaches to housing in Selma, so that as we're building back and we're building back stronger, what does that look like? When the housing inventory there was strained pre-tornado, strained even more now. So how can we become creative in doing this? I was thinking you don't have to look far when you think about Katrina having come through, that there's some models there that we could likely use, but it will take investments in different forms of capital to make that happen. But it also takes others being able to think differently, to imagine differently, and to think creatively. Because I can't say enough, if the greatest thinking that can be done is what has been done, that ain't gonna get it for Selma. And I know that's not grammatically correct, but that is very truthful, because if that could have worked, we wouldn't be in the shape that we're in now. So I think that that's definitely one of the ways we can begin to look at creative approaches to making sure that we have housing. How can we use different bond markets to help provide capital that can help our city and our area. So I think that the opportunities are endless. One of the pieces I wanted to lift up, and I was talking a bit with Steph about this, is the mental health needs. We know in our communities that we have people who have really been traumatized, as is in most communities. So finding a way that we could have, even some type of funding that would allow us to have mental health providers on the ground, providing services, for around a 6 months to a year period. And so there's not just providing services on a one-on-one basis, because there may be some folks who are more resistant to that. So maybe it needs to look like dialogue circles or community dialogue circles where people can come together and share together what needs to happen. I know those are some of our immediate needs. We're also in the process of building an innovation center. We've actually started all the work on it, where it will serve as a resource hub in Selma. And that's a piece of what is on the ground that's working. And that will help us with continued economic development, because the goal is long-term, and that's what we're looking to do. Also want to say, as Harold talked about the shelters, many of our communities do not have storm shelters in place. So a lot of what we do is we work to make sure. We've begun a project where we made an initial investment of $120,000 to put 4 shelters in 4 of our counties that were most impacted by tornadoes, according to the data. And then those local folks that we invested in with $120,000 leveraged an additional $168,000. So instead of having 4 storm shelters in those counties, we now have 8. Well, we've done that in 4 counties, but we need to do it in more. And as I was talking with one of my colleagues, we discussed that in our region, many of our homes do not have basements, so they cannot serve as a shelter. As Harold mentioned, if you're in a mobile home that's 1 mile or 2 miles away from the city or where that shelter is located, what do you do? So most rural communities are very decentralized. So finding communities and spaces where investments can be made in these storm shelters can be housed and placed. That's a big piece of what we're doing in the area as well. And it looks so different than what the traditional or the normal way of helping looks like, but it is what works for a community. So I can't say enough about funders seeing and acknowledging the value that comes with investing local. And I think so much as we talk about buy local and all of what needs to happen on the local level, and investing in local is not a bad idea either. And I have to give this to Jerry as well, that those who are proximate to the problems are also proximate to the solutions. And so I'd like to leave folks with that as you consider and you think of ways that you can invest. Even for us, a piece of what we're working to do is to raise $1 million immediately. And we do have a prospective funder for this that we will push out immediately to organizations on the ground. And they are trusted organizations that we've had at least a 15-year history of working with. So we know their power and what they're capable of doing, but it is to move the resources to them so that they can then help in the way that community needs them to help. So I know I've said a lot because this is, I just keep saying to myself, I was like, this is not rocket science. We know what needs to be done, but just because it doesn't look like the same, solution that it may look like in a city, the rural area solution may look different, but it is valid nonetheless.
I hear you. Your passion shows through, Felicia. Stephanie, similar question to you. What do you think funders can do to support the long-term recovery process? If you have anything to add.
Absolutely. No, I want to just echo the trust. So investing locally and trusting people and trusting the existing leadership to move and to go big. I think that now is the time. These are going to keep continuing to happen. We need to be creative. We need to be multi-year. We need to be general operating. So that's, it's not rocket science. We know what we need. Y'all know what to do. We can move this together. I do want to lift up some of that existing infrastructure that gets to these rural communities across the South, because we know beyond this particular storm impact and system, this is going to continue to happen. We've been learning, we've been growing systems. I'll put them in the chat, but the Southern Power Fund came together around the public health crisis, but we've been responding to the Mississippi winter storms in Texas across, we've been responding to Puerto Rico hurricanes, what's happened in Florida. And so we're learning as we go. That's an investment possibility. Southern Movement Assembly is that type of collaboration across movement organizations that can then deploy and support people, set up these hubs. Project South's land right there in Griffin. It's an old Girl Scout camp. We've got that land in Griffin to be a resource hub. We want to learn from what Selma's doing and to make that possible over the next few years, because this is going to continue. And then the Gulf South for Green New Deal has a strong hubs in Alabama. They have community control funds that have been learning over the last 17 years since Katrina how to develop equitable resource distribution strategies that go on year to year to year. So not just in that moment, but beyond. And so I just want to encourage funders to think outside the box, certainly invest in existing and localized infrastructure, to trust the people to know what to do with it, and to go big and go multi-years, because this endeavor and our recovery is going to be over several years. And then our preparedness needs to be over the next few decades. And Selma showed us that through its civil rights and Black radical history. And so we want to, there could be a shining light here from Selma to Griffin and beyond. That really shows again how powerful it is when communities come together to not just take care of each other, but to really transform our communities for the long haul. And I'll put these links in the chat, y'all, to connect.
Great, thank you. We have received a couple of questions in advance, and so I'll be working through some of that list, as well as any that we receive in the Q&A box on your screen. As a reminder, CDP webinars are aimed at providing education for the philanthropic community. So while all are welcome to pose a question, we will first focus on those addressing funder issues. I noticed too in the Q&A box, there are some resources available that they're sharing as well. So those aren't necessarily questions, but the resources are being linked there too. So let's start here. Felicia, how does the damage compare to the 2011 tornadoes, if you can remember back? How will the recovery be similar, or how will it be different?
Well, I can say that much of the 2011 tornadoes, the biggest portion of that happened in Tuscaloosa. While it neighbors many of the counties that we serve, it is one of the outlier of the counties. But several of our counties, I think there were 3 of them who were impacted on a much smaller level. And I was even thinking to the types of storms. So I think Selma was looking at possibly, I think it was an E2, maybe a possible E2 or E3. And we know that we did have larger storms coming in 11, but I could tell you that what I know and remember of those storms is that much of the work, while oftentimes happens, was concentrated in the more urban areas. There were some resources made available, but the largest concentration was in the more urban area. What I see happening this time around, I think destruction in 2011, destruction in 2022, what I see happening differently this time around, and I think it will, well, I know it will be because the Black Belt Community Foundation is involved. That is because our work is done with our community. It does not happen in addition to our community, but it is done in side to side in partnership with those that we work with. So those who are affected will be sitting around the table, or are already sitting around the table, helping us decide what recovery looks like. You know, they're around the table deciding where dollars need to be distributed immediately. So I think that we will look different because we will be working in communities. And I saw one of the questions in the chat that said, you know, do you have the VOADs that are formed with the volunteers? And many of our counties do not have them. Some have them. They're not very active. And so I was thinking, you know, most folks are saying, well, you know, if you already knew the tornadoes happened in 2011, why weren't you prepared for this? Hell, we are trying to figure out how to get our education system on point, doing what it needs to do. We're trying to make sure that we have folks who have access to healthcare in our communities. We're trying to make sure, and I saw someone ask the question about absentee landowners. Our tax base is already suffering. So many of these systems we did not create, but it is the world that we are living in. And so what we're trying to do is kind of pave the road and drive over it at the same time. There are immediate needs that need to be met right now, not after we put policy in place, not after we do all of these things. So we have to look at a multi-pronged approach of how we will affect communities. And I don't know that that was done in the 2011 storms. I'm thinking that it was, but it was done more with the focus on the urban area of Tuscaloosa. And urban is relative compared to some of the larger cities. But for us, I know it will be an opportunity to really sit and work with the community, making sure the resources are in the hands of those who need them most. And then from there, the second prong of that, we will begin to work on policies. We will begin to work to make sure we talk with our Congresswoman about establishing the VOADs in each of the counties and doing one across the board for the Black Belt region. And if I can just take a moment, a personal privilege, I like to say that during the time that funds were released for COVID from the federal government, the structure and the way that those dollars were released in a way that would keep our communities from accessing those dollars. So accessibility is one of the main keys to us being able to get resources to do our work. Sometimes Greene County, who only has 8,000 people, they don't have the capacity to do that. And so maybe each county going on its own isn't the answer, but maybe it is forming a more regional approach to then be able to access funds to work together. So I see that being a difference in how we will move forward in addressing, in recovering in this area. And I don't want to say that it's different from what happened in 2011. It is just that I wasn't as involved in that level with the work that was being done in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, and every disaster is different, right, Felicia? So, Stephanie, how can funders support mutual aid? We've seen this blossom and bloom and become more strategic and organized. But how can funders support mutual aid and the needs of community organizers in this response?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question. And I think there's a real clarity around the connection between mutual aid and collective organizing, right? That it's not just one family by one family or a charity-based approach where we just get the basic needs to a family or a neighborhood or a community, but it's a reciprocity that can be created. And I think those resource hubs that we're describing and taking on a regional approach to how we respond is all part of mutual aid. And so that tie between preparedness plans, supporting the immediate response plans, supporting some of these recovery, all of that being tied to mutual aid and organizing can make us stronger for the long haul. And thinking about this regional approach, and certainly a lot of the resources that you all are sharing in the chat, we would love to have more access and more availability and more connection to resources that can help us support the navigation, right? That's the FEMA, translating FEMA, getting onto the online. First off, that's something we can provide through mobile hotspots and moving around. But the navigation through these forms and making them more accessible to all sort of levels and layers that Evelyn and Felicia and all of us have been describing feels really important. And we might need some capacity building to support that over the long haul. We also want to think about how dollars in the reconstruction and recovery efforts can be really rooted in community benefit agreements or creative versions of that in our different rural-based areas that are specific and locally defined and determined. But independent contractors, folks that by resourcing the recovery also builds up the capacity. That's if we can do it in a particular way that can be understood as mutual aid. That's not about handouts, but really about deepening and developing and strengthening the existing community-based infrastructure. And that's how we define mutual aid. And it's rooted in the civil rights movement and movements across the South that I think can also be a light for us moving forward and thinking about these hubs and what they require, and then investing in those hubs to have all of that at play and available. And then being able to produce, and coordinate across so that we're connecting, learning from each other, especially the mental health and medical pieces is crucial and often gets left off. And so making sure that we're building in a lot of those pieces that we've learned over time get left out of the mix or out of the conversation. And so, and then also I would say the last piece, communicating it out. Like, how do we show and share the work that the community does so that that investment can continue to build, and that we're not, so often we find after a disaster, we forget that community gets sort of left to deal with the next few years of recovery. So how do we change that narrative and show that every step we take, we're going to be stronger, we're going to be more creative, we're going to be just better together. And so I think that's all a piece of mutual aid and organizing, but that's going to be about investing in what's already there in terms of the expertise, the education, the facilitation, the organizing that we're all doing.
Thanks for that. There are organizations that have perfected maneuvering and navigation through FEMA. So I can connect you to some of those when we're done here. Harold, I do have a question for you. Since tornadoes don't have as much warning as perhaps maybe a hurricane or a large winter storm or something, how can funders support tornado preparedness?
Well, I think we talk about a couple of real things. One of them is access to shelter. That's number one. If you don't have a good option, there's not a whole lot you can do. But going along with that is actually some education processes. Real simple, having people understand, well, what are their best options where they are? Can they identify a place? When it's just like I know a lot of fire department people, and when they walk into a meeting in a room somewhere, they think, how am I getting out of this room when the fire starts while I'm in the middle of this meeting? Well, I think about the same thing, but if there's a tornado here, what's my shelter option? And that's just because the way I think. And I think that's a lot of it is we tend to do there's a lot of communication that takes place on, hopefully we're getting rid of it, that leads to people thinking there's nothing they can do to protect themselves. As opposed to, well, it's not going to be very nice, but this is your best option. If you do this, you've just, doubled your chances of surviving, or made it 10 times. And so getting that simple messages of here's what you can do in the situation you are is a big deal. I mean, I know that, my elderly parents, while they were still alive, and living together, there was a time when it reached the point that even though they were in a relatively good structure, it was a long time to move my mother any place. And we exacerbate that when we think about the poor, where their choices aren't good to start with. And so trying to get people to understand here's what we can do, and providing them ways to get information. NOAA weather radios. Boy, that's an incredibly good way to get quick weather information that's local. And that costs $20 to $30 a piece, and getting that information into people's hands, and then if they know what they should be doing and we provide them the information, they've got the best opportunity they can have.
Definitely. So just one more question that I saw in the Q&A was about mobile homes and how can we protect people from those and still have affordable housing? Jeremy, I saw that question came from you, and I would actually send you to the CDP website, because we did an entire webinar about mobile homes and how their value in providing affordable housing and how we can make them safer and how they are safer. Newer versions are safer, but there's a lot of good information in our webinar. So I'll answer that one for you. And then probably time for one more. I'm not certain of the setup for Alabama or Georgia with 211, but if you know, I will open it up to anyone that can answer this. What is the role of 211 in this disaster? And how can funders maybe help with information sharing initiatives like this? And if that's been helpful in providing support to those that are affected by this. Do you know, Felicia?
Right. I do know that 211 does exist and is active in the region. I don't know that many folks have relied on it during this disaster. I cannot say that they have.
Do you know anything different, Stephanie? Well, I will say that my experience in other areas is that 211 has been a great resource, not just for people to access resources themselves, but also for the funding community to be able to understand the funding community and the responding community, not nonprofit community, to understand where the greatest needs are. So if it does exist and there's data associated with that, I really encourage you to access that or provide some way for access to that for those that are working on recovery there. And then I do want to get to just one more question. We had a couple of people asking about local organizations and why is it so important for funders to look to Black-led and local organizations in these communities. Stephanie, since Felicia just answered, we'll start with you, and then Felicia, if you want to follow up, that'd be great.
Why is it so important? Is that the question? I mean, one, they know what to do. They know what the problems are. They know who's going to solve the problems, and they're going to make it happen, period. So that's the simple answer. And I think why we have to say it is because there's been a systematic and systemic under-resourcing of Black-led organizations and Black-led movement institutions. And that's what we're trying to undo. And so I think just back to Felicia, and I'll send it back to you. It's about that level of trust, and it's about believing in folks to be able to solve our own problems and to coordinate that across entire regions. We've been doing that for decades. And Selma being that birthplace is just a guiding light to remind us that's exactly how we do it. And it is investing in Black leadership, Black-led organizations, and local leadership that's moving together.
And I'll just tag on to say ditto to all that Steph said. And I think that it is important because even hearing that coming from Steph compared to it coming from me, it has different meanings to different, or is received differently by others. So I do think that it has to be said, it has to be acknowledged, it has to be put on the table. And like I said, because even much of the struggles that our organization has faced as we have worked to find dollars to support us so that we can be sustained for different ways. And building an endowment, it is different. Many people don't always see and trust community the same. If it's a Black-led, Black woman-led organization, some folks diminish the value of what's brought to the table by that being so. And if this is a place where we're just being truth tellers, that it is that's a part of the system, that's a part of the structure and the status quo that unless it is disrupted, will continue us to be in that place. So I do think that it is difficult, and not just when it comes to race or gender, but in a manner, if you having a heart problem, you don't go to a podiatrist. And so they're a doctor nonetheless, but you really want the heart doctor. And, unless you all know something I don't, but I guess I say that because I think that there are ways and spaces that we do trust community, and that must be done if we want communities to help create lasting change. If we just want to, kind of parachute in, do something for a minute, but if we really want to create change that's lasting, we've got to continue to work inside community.
You said it, both of you said it so well. Thank you. And we want to lift up those voices that serve the community and represent the community. So, good for you. Well, that's all the time we have for questions today. I will note that there are some 211 stats listed that might be helpful to everyone in the Q&A. Thank you for that. As we begin to wrap up, I want to provide the audience with some actionable thoughts from our conversation. Remember the geography. This system hit a large swath of 2 states. Many rural areas won't get the same level of support from external sources and won't have the same access to community organizations. Ensure your funding supports everywhere that was affected. Address pre-existing issues and root cause problems. Every funder is a disaster funder. This disaster is exacerbated by the previous crises of housing, racial discrimination, and poverty. Systemic and historic discrimination amplify your disaster's impact. While you fund the disaster, also address food insecurity, healthcare access, housing shortages, and stability, and racism, and mental health, and all of these things, just to name a few. Support community leaders and movement builders. Include those people who are building movements for local power in your response, recovery, and future planning. Their local knowledge is key to creating more effective action. You can find many resources that can assist you on our CDP website, from our issue insights to our disaster profiles, including one on the 2023 U.S. tornadoes, to our disaster philanthropy playbook. CDP provides numerous resources for those planning disaster funding. There's a monthly newsletter full of information and regular blogs, including our weekly What We're Watching blog that highlights disasters around the world. CDP staff team is always available to provide guidance, and if you need more in-depth assistance, we also provide various consulting services. You can find more information about our work at disasterphilanthropy.org. Our February webinar will look at the expanding hunger crisis around the world. We'll hear from experts from the United Nations Office Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Food and Agricultural Organization, and ORAM. I hope I said that correctly, a CDP grantee working with LGBTQIA+ populations. Join us for that on February 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern for that discussion. In order to respect everyone's time and keep this to an hour, this is all the time we have for today's webinar. Thank you to our co-sponsors and to Felicia, Harold, Steph, and Evelyn for taking the time to share their insights with us. Please take a moment to complete our post-webinar survey to let us know what you liked and what you would like to see in future webinars. It will pop up automatically when you exit. If you have questions or thoughts that were not addressed during today's webinar, you may email them to Tanya at tanya.gulliver-garcia@disasterphilanthropy.org. Thank you all for joining us today and have a great afternoon.